scared going to the dinner and losing there because
Right.
there's no
Right.
way, if this is the winner, that you could ever win.
Right.
It's
Sorry,
kind of book.
I'm sorry,
So-
Laura. I'm gonna place Rumaan. I'm gonna hide him really quick, and then we'll be right
Okay.
back.
Oh my
Alright.
God, it's time to go.
Alrighty.
Okay. Hi, I'm Laura Lippman, and I'm here tonight to talk to Rumaan Alam about the amazing Leave the World Behind, which was the Barnes & Noble book club selection for October. I'm a crime writer. I've written more than 20 books. And I've also had the good fortune to know Rumaan a little bit, someone I met on social media. Well, actually, we met before social media, but we've furthered our friendship there, and I've been lucky enough to see our paths cross multiple times since then. As you know, Rumaan had written 2 previous books, both wonderful. And then came Leave the World Behind, which I read, I believe, early this summer. I guess for all of us, time is kind of fuzzy. And I was just knocked out. I mean, it's always been evident that Rumaan is one of the great young voices of fiction. But Leave the World Behind is so timely and so important, and a book that has been having so much earned success. It's shortlisted for the National Book Award. It's been getting rave reviews. And it has been on the New York Times bestseller list for the last 2 weeks. And I'm pretty sure that's going to continue. So now let's welcome Rumaan and let's begin this conversation about his beautiful, brilliant book.
Hi, Laura. Oh,
Hi.
what a lovely introduction. Thank you so much. I'm so excited. It is like, one of the particular pains of this moment of being distant, right, is that there's a certain kind of togetherness that's specific to the book club. Like a book club is like a very special kind of togetherness. And even if it's a big book club, like a Barnes & Noble wide book club, as opposed to like your neighborhood, like group of 3 friends that you get together and discuss books with, like there's an intimacy there. And we're going to do our best to capture that feeling via Zoom, which is why I'm so happy I'm doing it with you. Like this is just the perfect pairing. So
I feel like we've already demonstrated in a little warm up to this that we're very comfortable.
Yeah.
I told you that I would begin talking about the book by not talking about the book, but with an icebreaker about, you did a list for the strategist of things you couldn't live without.
That's right.
And something that really caught my interest, and I just have a feeling that people in the audience care about this too, is you mentioned that in your time as someone who worked at magazines, you found out that beauty editors don't use any of the products that they tout.
I was wondering what you were, yes, that's right. Yes.
That they use the most. So tell us, what are the perfect everyday moisturizers that they're not telling us to buy, but that
I swear this is the truth, that every beauty editor I ever worked with, uniformly devastatingly beautiful women across the board, used toothpaste, deodorant, and olive oil or some other vegetable-based oil as moisturizer. I swear to you that they are paying lip service to shampoo companies, and many of them wore makeup, of course, but that's what they would tell me. Olive oil, coconut oil, and so I use coconut oil, and I just say the rest of it is just a trick to part you from your money.
Well, they're in a business, but yeah, I just wanted to double check this. So
yeah.
Because, during the pandemic, I started buying. It's really funny in a pandemic, and I feel like this is going to lead us right into a discussion of your book. In the pandemic, you quickly found out what are the things that you feel crazy obsessed about having in your house. For me, it's huge bottles of the extra light olive oil, because a friend who lives in Italy told me that you don't actually want to cook with really good olive oil.
Right. You want to eat it and taste it. That's right. Yes. Yeah.
So I always see like enormous jugs of this olive oil. And I was like, what are the things that you don't feel safe if they're not in your house?
Yes.
Homemade mayonnaise. But I'm going to back up a little bit, actually, before we start talking about Amanda's groceries, because, by the way, I wrote Amanda's grocery list in my notebook today.
Oh.
That's like, you write the whole thing. I wanted to see what it looked like written out. But I want to start with both the timeline and the idea. I want to know specifically the date as near as you can get to it. And I always love this phrase Nabokov talked about, the shiver of the idea of Lolita.
Yeah.
I want to know about when the shiver of the idea come to you and how did it come to you?
Yes. So, I mean, memory, as you said, is sort of like a feeble instrument, especially in this moment when time feels so confusing and compressed. But in the summer of 2017, my family took a holiday on Long Island and rented a house through Airbnb that is quite similar to the house I describe in this book. The gift of fiction is that you can improve, right? So like the fiction improves the reality, but this is a beautiful house. And it was the kind of experience that the characters in the book have, which is pretending to be someone else for a week, pretending to be like a little richer than you are, a little, that you have this house with a pool and can have this access to this beautiful experience for a week. I often feel very motivated to work when I am in a different geography. And while I was there, my husband goes to bed at like 8:30 when we're on vacation. So like I have nothing to do from like 8:30 until 11. So while I was there, I was writing a little bit at night. I wasn't working on this, but so that was I think it was August. And then in December of 2017, I was at the home of Laura Lippman, the crime novelist, on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. It was December, it was freezing cold, and I was there to write a book. You had very kindly let me borrow your place in New York City for 6 days. And I was there duking it out with a different book. And I found my attention drifting to this book almost like I was imagining like the person I was having an affair with, right? Like in a movie, right? Like just that this new person had come onto the scene and diverted my attention. And the idea, which was not, it was just like a nascent idea. It wasn't like I had no real thought about it, was how can you write a book that is a domestic novel that literalizes the notion of domestic by being entirely concerned with the house itself and push right through the walls of the house into the whole wide world, into the culture, into the politics, into what I think are the pressing issues of the moment. I've always thought that family life is the point of access for a lot of readers, right? Like family life is how readers enter. All of our best writers, I think Alice Munro writes about family life. Jonathan Franzen writes about family life. Family life is like an emotional like on-ramp for readers. But in my opinion, it can get you to something very big. It can get you to a novel that is really dealing with ideas and the culture. And so that's sort of the shiver, to use Nabokov's term. It would take a year or so before I sat down and understood, like, okay, I have the mechanism of a story.
Were you working on it in that year where you were like trying to like, were you circling?
I find it very difficult to articulate this, and I think maybe you'll understand this because you're a writer yourself, that there's almost this like, you know how cows have 4 stomachs, right? There's almost this like there's this sub brain where things are churning without you're necessarily realizing it. And that I find that I collect motifs or touchstones and I file them away. I write them down, so they are connected to the act of writing, but a lot of this happens mentally, where I will think in my head, oh, I'm interested in O.J. Simpson. I'm interested in swimming pools. I'm interested in flamingos. I'm interested in I'll just collect these motifs and I will understand the fabric of the whole much later on. And often it will come out as I'm writing, as I'm drafting. Once I have a sense of where the story is going and I start writing, I'll realize I had a place to put O.J. Simpson or flamingos or swimming pools, like whatever it was that was on my mind 6 months prior.
Yeah, I always tell people that basically every novel that I start could be titled "What Laura is Thinking About Right Now."
Yes, yes,
just like
yes.
this stuff of I'm interested in this, and if I'm interested in this, there has to be a reason other people have to be interested. Like, I'm curious, which character came to you first? Which character showed up first?
It's not. So I usually begin with the sound of the book itself. As opposed to the character. Although I did say earlier that the setting was also very important for this particular book. But there's a way that the book sounds, especially at the outset, where it's sort of almost, there's a little bit of distance between the narrative and what's happening. And it's almost like you're being told a story. I was thinking a little bit about because I am a parent, the act of total authorial control of reading your child a story before bed, where you have a mitigating voice that's telling you what's happening. And that's almost how the book sounds. And especially at the beginning of the book, I think there's a sense of elevated diction, like a kind of precision in the way the book is talking to you that sounds very, I hope, clinical and almost chilly. And I wanted that sound. So I think that was sort of the root of it. But it usually, as a writer, for me, it usually begins with a woman. And so it began with Amanda, who is the protagonist, one of the protagonists of the book.
I'm going to stay with voice here and for a moment, and this, or as you say, the sound of the book, because I did a lot of research for this, and I read your interview, where that interviewer described the voice as gonzo, semi-omniscient.
Yeah.
And I was really interested to see you very politely kind of push back. And you said,
I'm nothing if not polite, Laura.
Well, we all love it. But which, I mean, gonzo semi-omniscient, when I heard the phrase, I was like, oh, that's cool. But I remembered my own experience of reading it and having very much the experience of, oh my God, I am reading omniscient voice, what you have called it, the godlike voice, which is this really unusual choice in 2020.
Yes.
And even though this is a very writerly question, I have a feeling that the kind of readers who were in this event tonight would be interested in the choices you made to go back to this almost Dickens Victorian voice of I know even though some people would be like, well, you're undercutting the suspense if you're writing in a godlike voice. Yeah. But it was you talk about it because it was your choice and it was so brilliant.
Well, so this is a book of suspense, right? It is a book in which the characters are having an experience that they cannot quite understand. And in the early drafts of the book, the reader is having precisely that experience, to the point that it's actually kind of maddening. There's a point at which the reader can no longer accept this, and the reader needs to know more. So there's no way to do that, to provide the reader with access to something that the characters don't have when the psychology of the narrative is so close to the characters. So stepping back and saying, oh, these people think that this is what is happening and they're sort of half right, felt like the only way to accomplish that, to sort of suggest that there's someone telling you the story who's in control. And again, I use God as sort of the term for that. It does feel parental. It is, as you say, Victorian. It's a Victorian convention. It's a 19th century convention. It's quite out of fashion because the novel today, especially like the literary novel, the mode of the literary novel right now is a very close she. So the she is almost the I. So the book is telling you she did this and she thought the ice cream tasted a certain way. So the book is able to reach inside of her and talk about how she feels, but still hold her distant. This book does that a little bit, but it also understands what everyone is thinking. And indeed, it understands what's happening outside of the universe of this house where people are trapped, which is the one thing those characters don't have, is access to the larger universe.
There's a way of thinking about that close third person that I've often called it the gargoyle on the shoulder, where you're in the head, but also have that teeny bit of kind of ironic detachment. It's not a first person. But I wrote you like a gushing fan letter about this book as soon as I read it. And that was one of the things I was most struck by. I mean, I think something that's interesting to me as someone who works in a pure traditional genre, which is crime, is that people keep trying to label this book, and the label I see most often is literary thriller. Yeah. And I
don't even know what that means, to be honest with you.
I think it means like, you don't have to feel guilty about reading this book. It's okay. But I think one of the things I was really struck by is that in one interview, you said, this novel is kind of about literary fiction.
Yes.
And I'd love you to expound on that.
I think that there's a lot of, so the conversation around genre, specifically with this book, talks about me tinkering with the conventions of horror, because there are some elements that we might recognize as horror, or of the thriller, or of the sort of comedy of manners, especially the racially inflected comedy of manners. And what I say to that is actually, I think the genre that I'm toying with the most is literary fiction itself. And that also has its own received ideas about like how it is meant to function, that it is meant to occupy that close third person perspective we were talking about, that it is meant to be concerned with the trappings of middle-class existence, with material wealth, with consumerism generally, that it's meant to talk about marriage, especially heterosexual marriage, that it's meant to reckon with family life, especially the relationships between a parent and a child, more so than the inverse. So these are all conventions, and those are easier in a way for me to disrupt because I know those best as a reader. I'm not a reader who is really steeped in horror, although what's interesting to me is that those conventions are so well established. They're part of everyone's narrative frame of reference, regardless of whether or not you watch those kinds of films or read those kinds of books. Like, when you're talking about a party of people trapped together and one goes off, everyone knows what that means. It raises the same flag in everybody, it gets everybody hackles up in exactly the same way. But so too, like in literary fiction is also sending those signals that when you see a husband and wife driving in like a luxury enough car, you understand them as certain kinds of people. And when she's thinking about her work and he's thinking about his work, you understand like, okay, this will be a story about marital discord as relates to professional ambition. Like every genre is codified in a certain way, but as a writer of crime, I think you probably know this very well, there are only some genres that we feel comfortable kind of demeaning or dismissing.
Well, I mean, I love that you went here, and I didn't know where you would go with this, but the fact is, literary is a genre.
Of course, yeah,
which is,
of course.
You know, and there's so many people who write literary fiction who would be like, no, literary is what you have when you leave genre. Like, I don't think so.
It's just white people getting a divorce, you know, that's the genre.
But yeah, I like, to me, literary thriller is I recognize all genre terms on some level as marketing terms, and I'm fine with that. Our books need to be sold. They need to be put on shelves, and readers have their likes and dislikes, and they're entitled to them, and I want them to, but whenever I see literary thriller, I particularly feel like, oh, this is a book I really enjoyed, and I'm feeling vaguely nervous about how much I enjoyed it. But I mean, you pointed out that, that this is a book that's interested in like the make of the dishwasher.
Yes.
And and I love the fact that you talked about domestic life, because there is this complicated snobbery about, when are stories about families literary stories?
Oh, I know the answer. I know. The answer is when men write them. That's the answer.
Thank you.
So Jonathan Franzen writes social novels, but Alice Munro writes The Quiet Lives of Women. Right?
Right.
This is just this only has to do with the sex of the author and nothing else. I mean, Jonathan Franzen is a brilliant writer, but those are family, not The Corrections and Freedom are family novels.
Oh,
they are social novels by virtue of the fact that he pushes through the family to society. But again, so too does Alice Munro and like Laurie Moore and Laurie Colvin and a million other writers. I could name writers all day. So this is just a way of kind of understanding how to deal with or hold apart the contributions of women. Like it just, that's all it is. That's all it is, I think, in my opinion.
There's one relatively small part of your novel. It's only 2 pages. I've seen it referenced in so many places, and so I guess I should back up a little bit and just say a little bit about the novel. We have Amanda and Clay, Rose and Archie, their children, are heading out to this Airbnb in the Hamptons, which is going to provide them a week in the Hamptons in a slightly nicer house. And they're Brooklynites. They're doing okay, but not okay enough to have this house. And this is going to be like their little escape. And they have all their complications and tensions. And then there is an event that brings the owners of the house, who happen to be a Black couple, to the doorstep, and produces much of the conflict of the novel. But also there's been this event. But early in the novel, and it's so interesting to me because I loved this, and I've seen it referenced in so many places, Amanda goes shopping. And I showed it already, which is that today I went back to that passage in the book, and this is Amanda's grocery list. It comes to about $200. And I'm so many people are obsessed with this grocery list. It is like a tone poem. You could read it aloud and people would just be like, that's the most beautiful thing. I need you to tell me about Amanda and her groceries. And it's fine if you just say, oh my God, I wrote that in 5 minutes and it was completely thoughtless. But to me, it feels like such an important kernel of the novel. I feel like so much important work is done in those 2 pages.
I think you're right. I mean, I don't know if I'm allowed to agree with that. I hope that that's true. It is very early in the book. We have just met these people and I needed to paint them in, right? The first part of the book changes in register around page 30. So the book seduces you into believing this is a straightforward novel about a family going on holiday, which is a kind of novel. There are many novels about families going on holiday and secrets are revealed. And
Emma Straub, The Vacationers.
Right, The Vacationers. There's so many books. Like it's a convention of like people go to a new geography and sort of secrets are laid bare and all of these things happen. And I think this book wants you to believe that that's what's going to happen, but it's got to work quickly because I need to get to the moment where there's a knock on the door. And so I can't take my time and say, this is who these people are. This is what they're doing. How could I show you who they are very quickly? And I did it using a language that I know very well, which is the language of middle-class consumption and the language of food, which I happen to love. So it was very easy for me to say, this is who she is. And I as you say, I hope there's some elegance to it, but it's written very straightforward. She bought this, she bought this, she bought this.
Well,
and there's
so much elegance to it.
I hope there's meaning in that she's buying all of these plastic containers, which is the story of contemporary life. And she's buying things that she can't quite afford. She's buying the recycled paper coffee filters. And what happens is you understand these people anthropologically. This is our culture. We live in a culture of capital. The things that we buy are the story that we tell ourselves. The things that we buy to eat are the story that we tell our immediate family. This says, this is who we are. We are the people who eat free-range meat. We are the people who also like Doritos. Like there's a Venn diagram there and we situate ourselves inside of that. We buy recycled paper coffee filters because we believe that matters, that is a gesture that demonstrates where we are politically. We don't shop at whatever store because we don't buy our groceries at Walmart because we don't support guns or whatever, whatever it is. These are how you tell the story of who you are. And my hope is that the reader encounters that and feels that they understand who these people are without me having to say, this is where they went to college. This is what they do for a living. This is what their apartment looks like. This is what they look like physically.
There's so many tiny, wonderful adjectives in that grocery list. Cold, hard lemons. And when you write, she bought the same ketchup everyone bought, I was like, what?
You know what that is? You can picture the bottle of Heinz that everyone buys, right?
Yeah. And $12, and the fact that, and the Ritz crackers, which are the crackers that everybody loves. I'm going to jump ahead to some questions that are coming in from the audience already.
Please do. Yeah, please do.
One of these is, it dovetails with something I wanted to talk to you about. Tiffany is very interested in the introduction of race into the story and ask what you're trying to convey through GH and Ruth. If I may build on that, I'm interested in general in your approach to race and the way that your career as a, can I put in quotes, writer of color, where your choices about how you write about race are put under a microscope in a way that I think is different, because you're not writing about race in the way that people expect you to write about race.
Yes.
So if you could take off on that.
Yes. To answer the first question, I think that we spoke a little bit about like genre is built on convention. There is a convention of the arrival of a person who is unexpectedly of a different race that's built into our cultural system of reference, regardless of whether you've ever seen Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, right? It's sitting inside of your cultural frame of reference. It's part of what happens. Do you remember in the first season of Downton Abbey, right? I think it's the first season when the youngest daughter was still alive.
I've never watched Downton Abbey.
It really doesn't matter. She sees like a Black person performing at a nightclub. And it's the same thing. It triggers exactly the same associations that every reader, Black and white and other, is primed to expect, that like the arrival of this Black person will force a conversation about difference. It will force a confrontation of some sort. So that is fun to me to deploy, because it gets people to respond exactly the same way that when later one of the people among these six who are trapped together, when one of them wanders off, the reader has another response of like, oh God, that person has gone off. Nothing good can come of this, because we know that's how storytelling works. But the fun for me is in not really answering what happens when the Black people show up, because it occasions them spinning entirely off of the map. They actually don't know how to deal with one another. So it becomes a way of talking about race, but also I think the book is sort of concerned with things beyond race. That the book is understanding that a lot of these political conversations are a distraction from other conversations. And so I think the book tries to have it both ways, tries to say like, yes, this is a serious, interrogation of race and how it affects these particular people, but also the book, I hope, suggests that there's something else that we need to be attentive to beyond race, or that we need to look past race, not in some sort of touchy-feely 1970s way of like, I don't see color, but in a way of like, we need to like look to the bigger problems facing the culture.
Yeah, well, for example, climate change does not seem particularly interested in anybody's race.
It isn't. And it is, but at the same time that we understand that climate change disproportionately affects communities defined by color. So
Right.
It's just as with coronavirus, right? Like communities of Black and brown people are disproportionately suffering from coronavirus because of many other inequities baked into this very lopsided system that we have cobbled together. And so it's not that it's not useful to interrogate race, but it also is a suggestion that maybe it's connected to a whole host of other issues, I think. And with respect to my own race, I mean, I'm not Black, so I'm writing about Blackness used in opposition to whiteness, as it sort of is often deployed, especially again in the convention of literary fiction. I find it like a kind of fun rebellion to, I don't, there's no particular depth to that. I don't think I'm not joking around. It's stuff that I take very seriously, but I'm just not that interested in performing the kind of novel that I think is probably expected of a writer who looks like me, which is the novel that's sort of the veiled autobiography.
Right. I mean, I think and also you're the father of 2 Black sons.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is sort of like, and that's an important thing, because I think that sort of casts into relief my own disinterest in my own biography, because having children sort of changes your focus, at least it did for me, from the sort of egocentrism of the self to the egocentrism of your children, like investing in your children wholly, like they sort of take over that sense of self.
I feel like we kind of promised each other before we started tonight that one thing we would talk about, and my God, we're running out of time and this is so frustrating, is that I really wanted you to talk about the idea of the artist as a family guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
As a fully involved, like, you told me that, you just literally gave one of your kids a bath right before we got going on this. And I'm really interested in your take on a creative person, it could be a writer, it could be any creative person, as someone who is also fully engaged in family life, and how that affects, influences, and dare say, even improves our work.
Oh, I mean, I don't think that's a stretch at all. The children, even when I'm not writing about parenting, the children give me access to something that is enriching. And in some ways, I think you simply have to choose to find enrichment where it is, right? You don't have to be a parent to access something deeper, but you have to choose to like find that deeper thing wherever, in whatever the circumstances of your life are. I love being asked this question because the truth is that men are very rarely asked this question. I do have children. They're young. They're not so young anymore. They're 8 and 11. They're little kids, and they demand my focus, and I am committed to that responsibility as a parent, and I'm equally committed to my career. So this is something that like men historically have not had to reckon with, because they've been able to like, as Jenny Awful says in Department of Speculation, like Vera Nabokov was licking Vladimir Nabokov's stamps. Like he didn't have to do anything, right? And I have an extremely generous spouse who is more than a partner to me in the care of our family. But the truth is that I am committed to being a parent. I like it. I enjoy it. It's good for me. It's good for my work. It's good for my psyche. So it's not something I resist doing. So the challenge is figuring out how to square that responsibility with my responsibility to my own work. And this is something that people have been doing for so long. I mean, I talked to the novelist Samantha Hunt once. I hope this isn't a secret because I'm just going to say it. But she described to me writing while pregnant and sitting in her car because I think she has an older daughter, and she might even have twin older daughters, and she had to get out of the house and the only place to go was the car. This is something that moms have done very cleverly for a long time, right? Like, so you famously hear about Toni Morrison waking up early in the morning. That's not what made her a genius. She was a genius. That had nothing to do with it, but that's how she got the work done. That's how she figured out how to do it. And, if she could figure out how to do it, I can figure out how to do it. And I have a lot of access to other kinds of privilege that make that simpler. But I think that for me, the way I've been able to square it is by refusing to see it as a problem and seeing it simply as something to negotiate, something that enriches my own work, that it enriches my work, that I care about my kids, and I have this tether to something beyond the self. And hopefully that it enriches my children's experience of the world to understand that there's something else that I care about, that they are my priority, but I have this other thing, and other things matter, and that art matters, or that, people's job matters. It doesn't matter if you could drive for FedEx, and it doesn't matter. It's like, if that is the thing that matters to you, it matters to you,
So, I mean, my own experience is that, is correlation causation?
Yeah.
I'm a better novelist since I had a kid.
I never published a book until I had a child.
So,
I never published a book before I had a child. I had all the time in the world and I didn't use it. So I will say that having a child is it's an efficiency machine.
It does. It makes you very, very efficient. I'm going to take another question from the people participating. I like this question from Megan. Do you have any idea of what happens to the characters after the events of the novel? Can you talk about that without spoiling the novel?
Yes, I can. I think I know what happens to the characters. And I think that if you read especially the end of the book closely, there is a suggestion inside of the book about what is going to happen. As to the events that are hinted at but never really defined, I don't know. Because to me, this is a book that is fundamentally about what we don't know. And all that we know is that we don't know. And so that felt like a really pure place to be writing from. So I don't have some hypothetical scenario in my head of Iran has started a nuclear war, or aliens have landed, or this has happened, because it's immaterial. What's material is the particular feeling of not knowing what is happening to you. And that was very easy to access because that is how we feel all the time. We get all this information, right?
It's like,
that's how we feel. There's no information. I went to vote today. I stood in line for 3 hours, and I kept saying to my husband, like, what's going to happen next Tuesday? And he was like, I don't know. He doesn't know. Nobody knows. And that is the bargain of existence. And that's how it's always been.
and without giving it away, that's the beauty of the last line of this book. It strikes me that you are particularly good at writing the last lines.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's very kind.
I feel like this is, and I know that you have said in other interviews that you sort of knew the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
But did you know that last line? That
Yeah.
last line, like, just tore through me. And I was just like, I was wrecked because it's so beautiful and so true.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I certainly, obviously, I don't have to tell you this, that like the distance between draft 1 and draft 15 is vast. But I did sense at some point that I wanted the book to end with a question, as this one does. And I knew sort of what the question was going to be. I knew what it was building toward. And so, yeah, it's like you have this kind of finish line in sight. And when you get there, you kind of understand what to do. So thank you. I mean, I love hearing that. Thank you.
I have a question from Andrea. This is very interesting to me. It's hard to believe you wrote this book prior to the pandemic. Has the pandemic made you wish you'd done anything different with the novel?
It hasn't made me wish I could revise or anything like that, because in fact, I think the circumstances of the pandemic are so specifically in line with the circumstances described in the book that it's almost a happy accident. I think it's enriched the experience of reading it for a lot of people because it's a book about people trapped in their homes. A lot of us are feeling trapped in our homes, you know, with the understanding that that's ridiculous language. If you have a home, you're lucky, right? Like, it's like, but that's how we're feeling. At this point, I think we're feeling that way. And so the book reflects us something that's in the air psychically. But it is hard for me to believe that I wrote this book before the pandemic. I think what it suggests, though, in truth, like without joking, I think it suggests that we have a very bad cultural memory. That the feelings I'm describing in this book have been with us for a long time. So you take the murder of George Floyd, for example. It's a great example. It's a very tangible example of violence on our Black citizens, against our Black citizens, state violence against our Black citizens. But you don't even have to go back a month to find the previous example. And indeed, you can go back a decade and 2 decades and 3 decades and find other examples that were also huge cultural flashpoints, like Rodney King's beating. He was not murdered, but it's these things recur. So this sense of discomfort around how we are dealing with race in this country has persisted. The literal sense of entrapment is new and is connected to this moment, but a lot of the cultural feelings I'm describing, I think, have been with us for a long time.
I think I told you when I wrote to you about my admiration for your novel, is the novel I'm publishing next year is set in 2019, and it's about someone who's isolated in his own apartment for different reasons. And we talked about whether novelists are kind of these canaries in the coal mine who pick up on things like, and I mean, I don't know how I feel about that question, because I'm not arguing that novelists are special or more prescient, right. But it's kind of our job to show up. That's
what it is. It's the job. That's the function of art. The function of art is to distill something in the culture. And so the art reflects the culture very, very plainly. And so just as like, and you can, what happens is that the cultural circumstances change. So you reread the art to find a location in the culture, like to understand it through that context. But that is the function of art. And I think there are other books that have come out even this year. Jenny Offal's book, Weather, is a great example. Lydia Millet's book, A Children's Bible, is another excellent example of books that are very concerned with a sense of the uncanny, a sense of the world that is off balance, and that are situated very much in the sphere of domesticity. That it's one person navigating family life and also kind of dealing with the sense that the world is off kilter.
I am seeing a lot of questions submitted by the people in the chat. People are obsessed with the flamingos and the meaning of the flamingos.
Meaning is a very difficult thing to talk about because, well, first of all, I have a flamingo tattooed on my arm, so I can show you that. And it's like hard to get it to angle.
What's the story behind the tattoo?
I got the tattoo when I finished the book. So I am weirdly afraid of animals. And maybe you can sense that in this book because there's a sort of healthy respect for the animal kingdom in this book. The flamingo to me is it's illogical. It's a very strange color. It's not how an animal ought to be. Those very tall wading birds, I think I even say this in the book, the joint in their leg bends in a way that is very uncomfortable to look at.
Not
right? You just look at it, you're like, oh, that doesn't feel right. It feels incorrect. Many years ago, my husband and I were in Bangladesh, in the mangrove forests of Bangladesh, which are like one of the wildest places, most remote places left on the planet. No one is there. There's a native population, but it is really an isolated and strange part of the world. And it is part of a migratory, it's a migratory path for these cranes that live, or storks, excuse me, that I think they live in China or something. And so we were there, and there were all these storks there. And there are no people there. And so I think the storks actually are not even afraid of you. I think they think you're part of the furniture. They think you're a tree. And so these massive birds, the size of like a petite woman, like a 5-foot bird with its weird leg bending backwards, is walking in the mud right next to me, like coming right up to me. I have videos of this. It's so weird. It's such a weird experience to encounter an animal like that. And it was just that desire to capture a sense of the world at its very weirdest. And so I don't know if it has any meaning. I think ultimately it's not up to the author, though, to determine what something means. It's really up to the reader, you know?
I think that's something we don't talk about enough, which is that books, people talk about interactive media as if it's something that like started 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
The book has always been interactive.
Yeah.
The book has always been changed by the person who read it. There's so many beautiful questions, and people have come to this with so much heart. And I'm sorry I can't ask you all of these gorgeous questions, but I'm going to end because we've come up against our ending point. What's the question that you want to answer? What haven't we talked about that you feel is something that you always want to be able to talk about when you're talking about your book?
Oh my God, Laura, that is such a hard question to answer. There's a moment in the book where Ruth is describing.
I'm going to jump and say Ruth is the wife of the couple who own the house.
That's right.
And are having their little getaway.
Exactly. And the family, these 4 adults, have spent a long time drinking and talking and developing a fear of what might be happening out in the world. And Ruth is wondering whether this is the end of their lives, that they're experiencing the end of their lives. And she talks about wishing that she could listen to a piece from Swan Lake. And there's something in that moment that feels very true to me. That if we are part of a culture for whom church going is less of interest than it was for our parents and grandparents, we still have access to like this transcendence, the sense of transcendence, and it's in art. And that there's something there that means something to me. And I think that describes how I sense I might feel in a moment of emergency, that I might think about my children, or that I might think about things I have loved, you know? And it's a feeling I've been missing lately, especially because we're not going to museums. Although I did go to the museum today to vote, and I didn't get to see any
I saw that. I
Yeah.
saw that. You know, I was thinking, I have only left Baltimore. Well, I went to take a little week in Delaware, about a mile from my mom, because I couldn't even enter my mom's house.
Yeah.
3 weeks ago, I drove up to New York. I stayed in that same apartment just to see the Jacob Lawrence show at the Met.
Yeah.
And I was like,
yeah.
you know, everybody's making their own.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm comfortable going to a museum. The ceilings are high.
I mean, it's the size of an airport. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, but I won't get on a train. I have to drive out. It's like, but it meant so much to me to go look at art. And I just,
there's a particular, so I interviewed a woman named Sheena Wagstaff, who's a curator at the Metropolitan Museum. I interviewed her about a show that she put together on Gerhard Richter. And
the show that,
the show that
the
never
show-
got to open, unfortunately. And she described to me that there was a surge in museum attendance after 9/11, which I think dovetails with what I'm saying to you about Tchaikovsky in this book. Faced with the worst, we have an instinct to look for the best. And I think that that is very human and feels very real to me, and it feels very meaningful to me. And hearing this woman, Sheena, just say that, to put it in those terms, not as a defense of what she does for a living. She doesn't need to defend what she does for a living, but she was articulating like that what she does has a function. Like this is an important part of our society that we shouldn't pretend is not. What is the point of having a culture? What's the point of having a civilization if it's not for Tchaikovsky? You know, like what's the point?
we are right up on our 45 minutes, and I cannot imagine a more perfect ending to this discussion. I think that's what we've been circling around the whole time, which is that I don't know if art can save us. I know it can heal us. And I know that every time during the past 9 months,
I mean, it's been a while now.
that every time I allow a book or a painting or a film to touch me, I feel better. Your book is gorgeous. This is one of the best books I've ever read in my life.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
So thrilled, and I miss you so much.
I know, this was really lovely. This was like a very close to getting that particular intimate book club feeling. So thank you so much. Thank you to Barnes and Noble. Thank you to you, Laura. Like, what a treat. What a treat.
An honor. And we will. I feel like it's every day is Passover. Next year in Jerusalem.
Yes. Next year on the Upper West Side, Laura.
Good night, all. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
I'm taking us out. Good night, Barnes and Noble. Thank you.
Bye.